Welcome to Daily Dharma Listening. Imagine this moment as a quiet room you can step into, even if the world outside your headphones is loud, restless, and demanding. This is not a lecture, and it is not a sermon. It is a slow walk through ideas that are thousands of years old and yet strangely intimate with your life today. Ancient monks once listened to the wind move through trees with the same attention you now give to notifications and screens. Their questions were not so different from yours. How do I stay calm when everything feels unstable? How do I find peace in chaos? How do I live without fear when the future feels uncertain? Buddhist teachings begin with a simple but unsettling observation. Much of our suffering does not come from what happens, but from how tightly the mind grips what happens. You may recognize this in small moments. A delayed message that spirals into anxiety. A careless word that replays in your thoughts long after the conversation ends. A single bad morning that convinces you the entire day is ruined. Buddhism for beginners often sounds mysterious, but at its heart it is deeply practical. It asks you to look directly at your experience and notice where the tension is being created. There is an old image used in Buddhist wisdom. The mind is compared to a glass of muddy water. When you shake it, the water becomes opaque. You cannot see through it, and you might believe the water itself is dirty. But if you simply place the glass down and wait, the mud settles. The water becomes clear again without effort, without force. This is not about fixing yourself. It is about allowing clarity to return by not constantly stirring the mind with fear, judgment, and endless commentary. In modern life, we are taught to shake the glass constantly. We scroll, compare, react, and anticipate. The mind rarely rests long enough for anything to settle. This is why Buddhist lessons for anxiety often feel like a relief. They do not demand that you become a different person. They gently invite you to stop adding fuel to the fire. When anxiety arises, the teaching is not to suppress it, but to observe it as a sensation, as movement, as something that comes and goes. Anxiety loses much of its power when it is no longer treated as a personal failure. To protect your energy, Buddhism does not suggest building walls around yourself. Instead, it suggests understanding impermanence. Everything that arises will pass. The feeling that overwhelms you today will not remain in the same form tomorrow. Even joy is fleeting, and that is not a tragedy. It is a reminder to meet each moment fully without clinging. When you cling, fear grows. When you allow, the mind softens. There is a quiet strength in this approach that modern culture often overlooks. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength is the ability to pause before reacting. It is the capacity to breathe once more before speaking. It is the willingness to admit that you do not have to solve your entire life in one afternoon. These are not dramatic gestures, but they slowly transform your mind. A common misunderstanding about Buddhist teachings is that they encourage withdrawal from life. In truth, they encourage deeper engagement. When you are not constantly defending an image of yourself, you can listen more openly. When you are not consumed by fear of loss, you can love more freely. To live without fear does not mean living without risk. It means living without the constant expectation of disaster. It means recognizing that uncertainty is not an enemy, but the natural condition of being alive. If you are feeling lost, Buddhist reminders are often surprisingly gentle. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are simply in a moment of change. The path is not a straight line. Ancient monks understood this well. They did not measure progress by achievements, but by the quality of attention they brought to each step. Washing a bowl was as sacred as chanting a sutra, because presence was the practice. As you listen, you may notice a subtle shift. The breath feels a little slower. The shoulders release without being told to. This is not accidental. The mind responds to permission. When you give yourself permission to slow down, the nervous system follows. This is one of the most practical answers to how to stay calm and positive in a demanding world. Calm is not something you chase. It is something you allow by removing what disturbs it. This series is not about blind belief. It is about curiosity. What happens if you pause before reacting? What changes when you observe your thoughts instead of obeying them? What opens when you stop treating every feeling as a command? These questions are as relevant in traffic, in relationships, and in moments of self-doubt as they were in ancient monasteries. If this space feels helpful to you, consider supporting the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video with someone who may need a quiet moment today. Daily Dharma listening grows through simple acts of connection, much like the teachings themselves. As we move forward together, remember this. You do not need to escape your life to find peace. Peace is already woven into your experience, waiting for attention. Even in chaos, stillness is possible. Even in confusion, clarity can arise. This is the beginning of learning how to find peace in chaos, not by controlling the world, but by understanding the mind that meets it. There is a quiet truth at the center of Buddhist teachings that many people sense long before they have words for it. Nothing stays the same. Not the body, not emotions, not relationships, not even the ideas you hold about yourself. Impermanence is not a distant philosophical concept. It is unfolding right now, in the subtle way this moment replaces the one before it. When Buddhism for beginners speaks of impermanence, it is not meant to unsettle you, but to release you from unnecessary struggle. Much of the tension in modern life comes from resisting change. You may notice this when you replay the past, wishing a moment had lasted longer, or when you imagine the future, hoping it will finally stabilize everything. The mind believes peace will arrive later, after something improves, after something ends, after something begins. Buddhist wisdom gently challenges this belief. Peace is not postponed. It is either present now or it is misunderstood. Consider how often the mind says, once this problem is solved, I will relax. Once I feel confident, I will live without fear. Once life becomes predictable, I will find peace in chaos. Yet life never fully settles. One situation resolves, and another emerges. This is not a failure of life. It is the rhythm of existence itself. The Buddha did not promise a world without waves. He offered a way to learn how to move with them. When anxiety arises, it often feels solid and permanent, as if it has always been there and always will be. Buddhist lessons for anxiety invite you to look closer. Where exactly is this feeling? Is it in the chest, the stomach, the breath? Does it remain unchanged from moment to moment, or does it shift when observed? With careful attention, you may notice that even the strongest emotion is made of smaller sensations that appear and disappear. This observation alone can begin to transform your mind. To protect your energy, Buddhism does not encourage you to suppress emotions or deny difficulty. It teaches discernment. Not every thought deserves your belief. Not every feeling requires immediate action. When you understand impermanence, you stop feeding states of mind that thrive on repetition. Worry weakens when it is not rehearsed. Fear loosens when it is seen as temporary. There is a story often shared in Buddhist traditions. A traveler comes upon a raging river and believes he must build an elaborate bridge before crossing. He spends years gathering materials, studying techniques, and worrying about failure. Eventually, exhausted, he notices a shallow crossing a short distance away. The river was never as impassable as his mind believed. In daily life, the mind often turns manageable challenges into overwhelming obstacles by insisting they must be permanent. This is why Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often return to simplicity. Breathe. Notice. Allow. These are not instructions to withdraw from responsibility, but to meet it with clarity. When you stop assuming that the current state defines your entire life, you regain flexibility. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of defend. You move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. Living without fear does not mean eliminating uncertainty. It means befriending it. Impermanence assures you that no pain is final and no joy can be possessed. This understanding brings humility, but also immense relief. You do not need to freeze life to feel safe. Safety comes from knowing you can meet change as it arrives. In relationships, this wisdom becomes especially powerful. People change. Expectations shift. Moments pass. When you cling to how someone used to be, suffering follows. When you allow others to evolve, connection deepens. Buddhist teachings do not promote detachment as coldness, but as freedom from grasping. Love without grasping is more spacious, more patient, more real. As the day unfolds, you may notice moments where frustration arises simply because reality does not match expectation. Traffic slows. Plans alter. Conversations do not go as imagined. Each of these moments is an invitation. You can tighten against what is happening, or you can soften into it. One path multiplies tension. The other gradually teaches you how to stay calm and positive without forcing yourself to feel a certain way. Impermanence also applies to identity. The person you believe you are is not fixed. You are not permanently anxious, permanently confident, permanently broken, or permanently healed. You are a process unfolding. When this is deeply understood, self-judgment begins to lose its grip. You stop demanding that today prove your worth. Ancient practitioners did not seek permanence because they knew it was an illusion. They cultivated awareness instead. Awareness moves with change. Awareness does not cling. Awareness allows life to be vivid without being overwhelming. This is the heart of Buddhist wisdom applied to everyday life. As you continue listening, let this understanding sink beneath words. Notice how the breath comes and goes without effort. Notice how sounds arise and fade. Notice how thoughts appear, linger briefly, and dissolve. You are not required to stop any of this. You are invited to see it clearly. When you stop fighting impermanence, you stop fighting life. In that surrender, something unexpected appears. Not passivity, but ease. Not indifference, but balance. This is how peace quietly grows, not by holding on tighter, but by learning when to let go. There comes a moment in life when holding on begins to hurt more than letting go. This moment often arrives quietly. It may come as exhaustion you cannot explain, as a dull ache beneath daily routines, or as a restlessness that no achievement seems to calm. Buddhist teachings recognize this moment as a turning point, not a failure. It is the mind beginning to understand that clinging has limits. Clinging is subtle. It does not always appear as desperation. Sometimes it disguises itself as responsibility, loyalty, or even love. You cling to an idea of how things should be. You cling to an image of who you think you must be. You cling to the hope that control will eventually bring peace. Buddhist wisdom does not condemn this tendency. It simply reveals its cost. The Buddha spoke of attachment not as a moral flaw, but as a misunderstanding. We attach because we believe it will protect us. We believe that if we hold tightly enough, we can prevent loss, pain, and uncertainty. Yet the tighter the grip, the more fragile the mind becomes. Like squeezing sand in a closed fist, the harder you hold, the faster it slips away. In modern life, attachment often centers around identity. You may define yourself by your productivity, your role in a family, your past mistakes, or your future ambitions. When these identities are threatened, fear arises. This fear feels personal, as if your very existence is at risk. Buddhist lessons for anxiety point gently to this mechanism. Anxiety grows when the self feels it must be defended at all costs. Letting go does not mean becoming careless or detached from life. It means releasing the belief that your worth depends on any single outcome. When you no longer stake your sense of self on success or failure, you begin to protect your energy in a deeper way. Energy is lost not through effort, but through resistance. Resistance to change. Resistance to uncertainty. Resistance to reality as it is. There is a quiet dignity in learning how to let go. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It shows up as a softer response where there was once tension. It appears as silence where there was once an argument forming. It reveals itself when you notice that a thought no longer needs to be chased. Buddhism for beginners often emphasizes mindfulness of the present moment. This is not because the present is always pleasant, but because it is the only place where clinging loosens its grip. You cannot cling to the past if you are fully here. You cannot grasp the future if your attention rests gently on what is unfolding now. Presence becomes a natural antidote to attachment. Consider how often suffering arises not from what is happening, but from the demand that it be different. You want the feeling to end. You want the person to change. You want certainty where none exists. Buddhist teachings invite a radical shift. Instead of asking how to control the experience, you learn how to meet it. Meeting does not mean liking. It means allowing. This allowance creates space. In that space, emotions move more freely. They come, express their energy, and pass. When you stop identifying with every emotion as a permanent truth, you begin to live without fear. Fear thrives on identification. It whispers that this feeling defines you. Letting go reveals that you are larger than any single state of mind. In relationships, attachment often appears as expectation. You expect others to behave in ways that confirm your sense of security. When they do not, disappointment hardens into resentment. Buddhist wisdom does not deny the pain of unmet expectations. It simply asks you to notice how much of that pain comes from insisting that others fulfill roles they never agreed to play. Letting go here does not mean withdrawing from connection. It means releasing the fantasy that control equals safety. When you allow others to be as they are, you respond with clarity instead of demand. You listen instead of prepare your defense. This shift transforms relationships quietly, without force. There is an ancient image of a bird resting on a branch. The bird does not place its trust in the branch itself, knowing it may break. It trusts its wings. In the same way, Buddhist teachings encourage trust not in circumstances, but in awareness. Circumstances will change. Awareness remains capable of meeting change. This trust is what allows you to find peace in chaos. Chaos does not disappear. Noise continues. Challenges arise. But your relationship to them changes. You stop bracing against life and start moving with it. The nervous system responds to this shift. Breath deepens. The body softens. The mind becomes less reactive. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often return to this point. You are not lost because something external has changed. You feel lost because you are clinging to a map that no longer matches the terrain. Letting go of the map does not mean walking blindly. It means learning to navigate by awareness rather than expectation. As you move through your day, notice where the mind tightens. Notice where it insists, resists, or demands. These are the places where letting go is possible. Not through force, but through understanding. Each moment of release, no matter how small, restores energy that was trapped in tension. To transform your mind is not to replace one set of beliefs with another. It is to loosen the grip of belief itself. When beliefs soften, curiosity emerges. When curiosity emerges, fear loses its authority. This is not a sudden awakening, but a gradual unfolding, like dawn arriving without announcement. Letting go does not take anything essential from you. It removes what was never truly yours to hold. In that release, life becomes lighter, clearer, and unexpectedly intimate. Beneath the constant movement of thought there is a quieter current that most people rarely notice. It is not dramatic, and it does not speak in full sentences. It feels more like a subtle knowing, a gentle sense of alignment or resistance that arises before words appear. Buddhist teachings have long pointed to this inner stillness, not as something mystical, but as something deeply ordinary and always present. Modern life trains attention outward. Screens, conversations, responsibilities, and worries pull the mind in countless directions. Thought becomes the dominant voice, narrating every experience, judging every moment, predicting outcomes, replaying memories. Over time, this voice begins to feel like who you are. Buddhist wisdom invites a careful observation. Thought is an activity, not an identity. It moves, changes, and pauses, just like breath. When the mind is constantly active, inner guidance is drowned out. You may notice this when you feel exhausted after making decisions, even small ones. The mind debates endlessly, weighing imagined futures, fearing mistakes. Buddhism for beginners often frames this as a misunderstanding of where clarity comes from. Clarity does not emerge from excessive thinking. It emerges when thinking settles. There is a difference between intelligence and mental noise. Intelligence responds to what is needed. Mental noise reacts to what is feared. When you begin to notice this difference, a shift occurs. You stop assuming that more thinking equals better outcomes. You begin to trust moments of quiet insight that arise without effort. This is especially important for those struggling with anxiety. Buddhist lessons for anxiety do not attempt to argue with anxious thoughts. They recognize that anxiety feeds on attention. When every anxious thought is examined, challenged, and rehearsed, it grows stronger. When attention shifts to the space beneath thought, anxiety loses its central role. Listening inward does not require withdrawing from life. It happens in ordinary moments. While walking, washing dishes, waiting in line, or sitting quietly before sleep. In these moments, if you are not actively engaging thought, something else becomes noticeable. A sense of presence. A feeling of being grounded in the body. A calm awareness that does not need to explain itself. This awareness is what allows you to protect your energy in a sustainable way. Energy is depleted not only by external demands, but by internal friction. When the mind argues with reality, when it resists what is happening, tension accumulates. When you listen beneath thought, resistance softens. You meet situations as they are, not as the mind insists they should be. Living without fear does not mean eliminating fearful thoughts. It means recognizing that fear is not the deepest voice within you. Fear speaks loudly because it seeks control. The quieter voice beneath thought does not seek control. It seeks alignment. When you learn to listen to it, decisions become simpler. Not easier, but clearer. Many people believe they are lost because they lack direction. Buddhist reminders: when you feel lost, point somewhere unexpected. You are lost when you no longer trust your own awareness. When you believe that every answer must come from analysis, approval, or comparison. Reconnecting with inner stillness restores orientation. You begin to sense what feels true without needing to justify it. This does not mean abandoning reason or responsibility. It means integrating them with presence. Thought becomes a tool rather than a master. You use it when needed and set it down when it creates unnecessary noise. This balance is a hallmark of Buddhist wisdom applied to everyday life. In moments of conflict, this practice becomes especially powerful. When emotions rise, the mind rushes to defend, accuse, or withdraw. If you pause and listen beneath the surge, you may notice a deeper intention. Perhaps a desire for understanding. Perhaps a need for safety. Perhaps simple fatigue. Responding from this level changes the quality of interaction. Words become fewer but more precise. Silence becomes supportive rather than awkward. Finding peace in chaos is not about escaping stimulation. It is about anchoring attention where chaos cannot reach. Chaos exists at the level of events and thoughts. Stillness exists at the level of awareness. When awareness is recognized, chaos loses its authority. It continues, but it no longer defines your inner state. This recognition gradually transforms your mind. You stop reacting to every mental impulse. You notice space between stimulus and response. In that space, freedom appears. Freedom not as rebellion, but as choice. You choose when to engage and when to rest. You choose what deserves your energy. Ancient practitioners cultivated this listening through silence, but silence itself was never the goal. The goal was intimacy with experience as it is. You can cultivate the same intimacy in a crowded city, in a demanding job, in a complex family life. The conditions do not matter as much as the willingness to pause. As awareness deepens, trust grows. You begin to trust that you do not need to force every outcome. You trust that clarity will arise when needed. This trust is not passive. It is alert, responsive, and grounded. It allows you to move through uncertainty without panic. The quiet voice beneath thought has always been there. It has been waiting patiently while the mind searched for answers elsewhere. When you finally listen, nothing extraordinary happens. And yet everything changes. At some point, everyone encounters suffering not as an abstract idea but as an intimate reality. It may arrive as loss, disappointment, illness, betrayal, or a quiet sadness that seems to have no clear cause. Buddhist teachings do not turn away from this truth. They begin with it. Not to dwell in pain, but to understand it clearly enough that it no longer dominates the mind. Suffering becomes overwhelming when it is personalized. The mind says, this should not be happening to me, this means something is wrong with me, this will never end. In that moment, suffering is no longer just an experience. it becomes an identity. Buddhist wisdom offers a highlight insight. Pain is unavoidable. Identification with pain is optional. When you feel emotional pain, there is a tendency to resist it immediately. You distract yourself, analyze it endlessly, or judge yourself for feeling it at all. Buddhism for beginners often expects techniques to eliminate pain, but the teachings move in a different direction. They show how suffering deepens when it is pushed away and softens when it is met with awareness. Meeting suffering does not mean indulging it. It means allowing it to be present without turning it into a story about who you are or what your future will be. When suffering is observed as sensation, emotion, and thought, it begins to shift. Not because you force it to change, but because you stop feeding it with fear. Buddhist lessons for anxiety often point here. Anxiety is suffering amplified by anticipation. The mind imagines future pain and reacts as if it is already happening. When awareness returns to what is actually present, anxiety loses some of its urgency. You discover that in this exact moment, you are breathing, supported, and not overwhelmed by the future the mind has created. There is a profound difference between feeling pain and becoming pain. When you become pain, every thought revolves around it. Every decision is shaped by it. When you feel pain without becoming it, something else remains intact. Awareness. Presence. The ability to respond rather than collapse inward. To protect your energy during difficult times, Buddhism does not advise emotional armor. Armor exhausts the one who wears it. Instead, it teaches openness without identification. You allow the experience to move through you without letting it define you. This approach conserves energy rather than draining it. In moments of grief or disappointment, this wisdom becomes especially relevant. Grief hurts because it reflects love. To deny grief is to deny connection. Buddhist teachings honor grief while preventing it from turning into despair. Despair arises when the mind insists that loss is permanent and unbearable. Awareness reveals that while loss remains, the capacity to meet it also remains. Living without fear does not mean avoiding suffering. It means trusting that you can meet suffering without losing yourself. This trust is not intellectual. It is built gradually, through experience. Each time you stay present with discomfort instead of fleeing, confidence grows quietly. Many people feel lost during periods of suffering. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost gently point out that feeling lost is part of the human experience. It does not mean you have failed the path. Often, it means the old way of seeing no longer works, and a deeper understanding is forming. Finding peace in chaos does not require a peaceful life. It requires a peaceful relationship with experience. Chaos is not the enemy. Resistance to chaos is what creates suffering on top of pain. When resistance softens, chaos still exists, but it no longer controls the inner landscape. This is how Buddhist wisdom transforms the mind. Not by promising happiness at all times, but by offering freedom from unnecessary suffering. Freedom from the belief that pain defines you. Freedom from the assumption that difficulty means something has gone wrong. In everyday life, this practice shows up quietly. You notice discomfort and breathe instead of reacting. You feel sadness and allow it instead of suppressing it. You acknowledge fear without obeying it. These small moments accumulate. Over time, the mind learns that suffering can be met without collapse. If these reflections resonate with you, consider supporting Daily Dharma Listening by subscribing, liking, and sharing this series. Each act of connection allows these teachings to reach those who may be meeting their own suffering in silence. Suffering does not ask you to be strong in the way the world often defines strength. It asks you to be present. In that presence, something remarkable becomes clear. You are not the pain you feel. You are the awareness that knows it. And that awareness has room for everything. Much of the tension that quietly shakes a human life comes from one habit so familiar it is rarely questioned. The habit of taking things personally. A look that seems dismissive, a message left unanswered, a comment that feels sharp, a situation that does not unfold as expected. The mind immediately turns inward and says, "This is about me." In that moment, peace dissolves and the inner world tightens. Buddhist teachings approach this habit with remarkable gentleness. They do not accuse the mind of weakness. They simply reveal how misunderstanding creates suffering. When something happens, countless causes and conditions are involved. Mood, history, stress, timing, expectations, and unconscious patterns all interact. Yet the mind simplifies this complexity into a single painful conclusion. I am the problem. I have been rejected. I am not enough. Buddhist wisdom invites a different way of seeing. What you experience through others is often a reflection of their inner world, not a verdict on your worth. This is not a psychological trick or a form of denial. It is a recognition of interdependence. No action arises from a single cause. No reaction exists in isolation. Taking things personally drains energy more than most external challenges. The body tightens. Thoughts multiply. Emotional stories replay again and again. To protect your energy, it becomes essential to notice when the mind turns an event into an identity. The event may be real. The identity is a construction. Buddhism for beginners often focuses on the idea of no fixed self. This concept is not meant to erase individuality, but to soften the belief in a solid, fragile center that must constantly be defended. When the self is seen as fluid, changing, and conditioned, criticism loses some of its sting. Praise loses some of its grip. Balance becomes possible. Consider how often suffering arises not from what was said, but from what the mind added afterward. The imagined intention. The predicted consequence. The replayed scene. Buddhist lessons for anxiety point directly to this pattern. Anxiety feeds on interpretation. When interpretation loosens, anxiety weakens. Not taking things personally does not mean becoming indifferent or emotionally distant. It means responding from clarity rather than reflex. When someone speaks harshly, you notice the words without immediately turning them into a judgment of your value. When a plan falls apart, you acknowledge disappointment without assuming failure defines you. Living without fear becomes more accessible when you realize that most fear is rooted in imagined threats to the self-image. Fear of being seen as inadequate. Fear of losing approval. Fear of being misunderstood. When the self-image softens, fear loses its primary target. There is a quiet confidence that grows from this understanding. You stop needing constant validation. You stop collapsing under disapproval. You begin to listen more deeply because you are no longer busy defending yourself. Conversations become less about winning and more about understanding. Finding peace in chaos is not about controlling circumstances. It is about releasing the belief that every disturbance is a personal attack. Chaos is impersonal. It arises from countless intersecting forces. When you stop insisting that chaos revolve around you, space opens. The mind relaxes. Perspective returns. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often include this gentle redirection. Step back. See the larger picture. Notice how quickly the mind narrows experience into a story of self. Then notice how much lighter things feel when that story is questioned. In daily life, this practice reveals itself in small moments. A disagreement no longer ruins the entire day. A mistake does not spiral into self-condemnation. Silence from another does not immediately mean rejection. Each time you refrain from personalizing, energy is preserved. Clarity is restored. Transforming your mind in this way is not dramatic. It is gradual and often unnoticed at first. You simply realize one day that situations that once consumed you now pass more quickly. You recover faster. You smile sooner. You breathe more easily. The Buddha did not teach indifference. He taught freedom. Freedom from the burden of constantly defending an imagined self. When you no longer carry that burden, life feels more spacious. Relationships feel less tense. Challenges feel more workable. Not everything that happens needs to be taken inside and examined. Some things can be allowed to pass through without leaving a mark. This is not avoidance. It is wisdom. The wisdom to know what deserves your attention and what does not. In that wisdom, a deeper kindness emerges. Kindness toward others, who are also acting from their own conditions. Kindness toward yourself, who no longer needs to be perfect to be at peace. Life rarely pauses to ask whether you are ready. Messages arrive, responsibilities stack, decisions demand attention, and the body moves from one task to the next with little space in between. In the middle of this motion, Buddhist teachings point to a quiet possibility that does not depend on slowing the world down. Rest can exist even while movement continues. Rest, in this sense, is not the absence of activity. It is the absence of inner struggle. The body may be working, the mind may be thinking, but awareness itself remains unstrained. Buddhist wisdom has always emphasized this distinction. Fatigue often comes not from what you do, but from how tightly you hold each moment. When the mind believes it must control everything, it never rests. It anticipates the next demand before the current one ends. It reviews past actions while performing present tasks. This constant overlap creates a background tension that many people accept as normal. Buddhism for beginners often begins by revealing this tension, not to criticize it, but to show that it is not inevitable. Awareness does not rush. It does not multitask. It meets one experience at a time. When attention settles into awareness rather than thought, a subtle shift occurs. You may still move quickly, but the movement feels less forced. You may still think, but thoughts no longer collide endlessly. This is how the mind begins to find peace in chaos. Buddhist lessons for anxiety often return to this resting place. Anxiety thrives on acceleration. It pulls attention into imagined futures and unresolved pasts. Awareness brings attention back to what is actually happening. The sensation of breath. The feeling of the body. The sound in the room. In awareness, anxiety loses its momentum. To protect your energy in a fast-paced world, learning to rest in awareness becomes essential. Energy leaks when the mind resists the present or rehearses what cannot be controlled. When awareness replaces resistance, energy naturally stabilizes. You stop spending effort on inner arguments that never reach resolution. Living without fear does not mean removing all threats. It means recognizing that fear is amplified by mental motion. When the mind slows, fear softens. When awareness is steady, fear no longer dominates the inner space. It may appear, but it does not take command. There is a common misunderstanding that rest requires withdrawal. Buddhist teachings show otherwise. Rest is a quality of attention, not a location. You can be resting while walking, speaking, working, or caring for others. The key is whether awareness is present or whether the mind is lost in tension. Consider moments when you feel surprisingly calm despite being busy. In those moments, attention is usually simple and direct. You are not divided. You are not resisting. You are simply engaged. This is awareness at work. It does not demand silence or solitude. It thrives on presence. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often invite you back to this simplicity. Before trying to fix your life, notice where attention is resting. If attention is scattered, the sense of being lost intensifies. If attention returns to awareness, orientation returns naturally. Transforming your mind does not require replacing activity with inactivity. It requires changing your relationship to activity. When action arises from awareness rather than compulsion, it becomes cleaner, less wasteful, less draining. You move because movement is needed, not because anxiety demands it. In moments of overwhelm, the mind often believes it must solve everything immediately. Awareness reveals that most problems do not require immediate resolution. They require clarity. Clarity emerges when the mind is not racing. Resting in awareness allows priorities to reorganize themselves without force. This rest is not dull or passive. It is alert and responsive. Awareness notices details that a hurried mind overlooks. It senses when to act and when to wait. It recognizes when effort is useful and when it is excessive. This discernment is a quiet form of intelligence cultivated through presence. As the day unfolds, there may be moments when you forget this resting place. That forgetting is part of the process. Awareness does not judge forgetting. It simply notices and returns. Each return strengthens familiarity. Each moment of rest, however brief, leaves an imprint. Over time, you may notice a change. The background tension lessens. The body recovers more quickly. The mind no longer feels constantly behind. This is not because life has slowed, but because resistance has softened. Buddhist wisdom does not promise a life without motion. It offers a way to move without being consumed by movement. In that freedom, rest becomes available everywhere, even in the busiest moments. There is a small space that most people rarely notice, a space so brief it is often missed entirely. It exists between what happens and what you do next. In that space, freedom lives. Buddhist teachings have quietly pointed to this space for centuries, not as an abstract idea, but as a practical doorway to transforming your mind. Reaction is fast. It is fueled by habit, memory, fear, and conditioning. Something happens, and the body tightens, words rush out, judgments form, emotions surge. By the time awareness arrives, the reaction has already shaped the moment. Response is different. Response is slower, not because it hesitates, but because it includes awareness. It arises from clarity rather than reflex. Modern life encourages reaction. Notifications demand immediate attention. Opinions are shared instantly. Mistakes are amplified. In this environment, reacting feels necessary for survival. Buddhist wisdom gently questions this assumption. Survival does not require constant reaction. It requires discernment. When you react, you are often reliving the past. Old patterns, unresolved experiences, and learned defenses take control. When you respond, you are meeting the present moment as it is. This distinction is subtle but powerful. It is the difference between being driven by conditioning and guided by awareness. Buddhism for beginners often introduces mindfulness as paying attention. But mindfulness goes deeper than noticing sensations. It includes recognizing the impulse to react and choosing not to follow it automatically. This choice does not suppress emotion. It creates space around it. Consider anger. When anger arises, reaction seeks release. Words sharpen. Actions escalate. Later, regret follows. Buddhist lessons for anxiety and anger alike invite a pause. Not to deny the feeling, but to feel it fully without acting it out. In that pause, anger often reveals something else beneath it. Hurt. Fear. Fatigue. When these are seen, the need to react weakens. To protect your energy, learning to respond instead of react is essential. Reaction consumes energy quickly. It multiplies conflict internally and externally. Response conserves energy. It allows you to engage without being depleted. Over time, this shift changes how the nervous system operates. Calm becomes more accessible. Living without fear becomes possible when fear is no longer allowed to dictate behavior. Fear often demands immediate reaction. Awareness asks whether that demand is necessary. In many cases, it is not. When fear is observed without obedience, it loses authority. This does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. Response can be firm, clear, and decisive. The difference lies in its source. Reaction comes from tension. Response comes from understanding. One leaves residue. The other leaves clarity. Finding peace in chaos depends largely on this capacity. Chaos triggers reaction. Noise, pressure, and uncertainty all provoke the urge to act immediately. When you learn to pause within chaos, chaos loses its power to dominate the inner world. You remain steady even when circumstances are not. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often emphasize returning to this space. Before deciding, before speaking, before assuming, pause. This pause is not empty. It is filled with awareness. In that awareness, options appear that reaction cannot see. In daily life, responding instead of reacting may look unremarkable. You take a breath before answering a difficult message. You listen fully before defending yourself. You wait before making a decision that feels urgent. These small moments accumulate. They reshape habits. They rewire patterns. Transforming your mind does not happen through dramatic gestures. It happens through these quiet interruptions of automatic behavior. Each time you choose response over reaction, you weaken old conditioning. You strengthen awareness. There is a sense of dignity that emerges from this practice. You no longer feel at the mercy of circumstances. You realize that while you cannot control what arises, you can influence how you meet it. This realization restores a sense of agency that is calm rather than forceful. Ancient Buddhist practitioners cultivated this capacity through meditation, but its application was always meant for life itself. Conversations, work, conflict, and solitude all become fields of practice. Each moment offers the same choice: react or respond. As awareness deepens, the pause becomes more familiar. It no longer feels like effort. It feels natural. Reaction still arises, but it is seen sooner. The body softens faster. The mind recovers more quickly. This is not perfection. reaction will continue to appear. The path is not about eliminating reaction. It is about reducing identification with it. When reaction is seen as a passing impulse rather than a command, freedom expands. In that freedom, something subtle shifts. Life feels less adversarial. Challenges feel less personal. You move through situations with more ease. This is the quiet power of learning to respond instead of react, a power that does not announce itself, yet changes everything. Uncertainty is one of the most uncomfortable experiences for the human mind. It creates a sense of groundlessness, as if something essential is missing beneath your feet. Plans lose clarity. Expectations dissolve. The future feels vague and unpredictable. Buddhist teachings do not attempt to remove uncertainty. They reveal something more surprising. Uncertainty is not the problem. The demand for certainty is. From an early age, the mind learns to seek guarantees. You want to know how things will turn out, how others will behave, how your efforts will be rewarded. This search feels reasonable, even necessary. Yet life rarely offers the assurances the mind demands. Buddhist wisdom recognizes this tension and points to a different kind of stability, one that does not depend on fixed outcomes. When everything feels uncertain, the mind often reacts by tightening. It tries to control, plan excessively, or cling to familiar patterns even when they no longer serve. Anxiety grows in this tightening. Fear whispers that without certainty, safety is impossible. Buddhism for beginners often encounters this fear early on. The teachings do not dismiss it. They gently expose its assumption. Safety does not come from knowing what will happen. It comes from trusting your capacity to meet whatever happens. This trust is not blind optimism. It is grounded in awareness. Awareness remains present whether circumstances are favorable or difficult. When you recognize this, uncertainty becomes less threatening. Buddhist lessons for anxiety frequently return to the present moment for this reason. Anxiety lives in imagined futures. Awareness lives here. When attention settles into what is actually happening, the future loosens its grip. You may still not know what comes next, but you know what is here now. Breath. Sensation. Presence. This knowing provides a form of stability that does not collapse when plans change. To protect your energy during uncertain times, it becomes important to notice where energy is being spent unnecessarily. Worry consumes enormous energy without producing clarity. Rumination drains vitality without resolving anything. Buddhist wisdom does not command you to stop worrying. It invites you to see its cost. When the cost is clearly seen, the mind naturally looks for another way. Living without fear does not mean eliminating risk. It means reducing the belief that risk equals catastrophe. Uncertainty always carries multiple possibilities, not only negative ones. The mind often fixates on the worst case, mistaking imagination for prediction. Awareness brings attention back to the fact that most feared futures never arrive. Finding peace in chaos becomes possible when you stop requiring chaos to resolve before peace appears. Chaos exists at the level of events. Peace exists at the level of relationship. When your relationship to uncertainty changes, chaos loses some of its power to disturb. There is an ancient understanding in Buddhist teachings that everything conditioned is unreliable. Bodies age. Emotions shift. Circumstances change. Trying to build permanent security on what is inherently unstable creates suffering. Stability, therefore, must be found elsewhere. Not in outcomes, but in awareness. When you begin to sense this, something relaxes. You stop waiting for life to settle before allowing yourself to feel at ease. Ease becomes something you carry rather than something you reach. This does not make you careless. It makes you resilient. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often emphasize this resilience. Feeling lost does not mean you have no direction. It means old reference points no longer apply. In that gap, awareness becomes the guide. You learn to move step by step rather than relying on distant certainties. In daily life, this practice shows up quietly. A change in plans no longer ruins the day. Unexpected news is met with a breath instead of panic. Decisions are made with care rather than urgency. Each moment of meeting uncertainty with presence strengthens trust. Transforming your mind in this way takes time. The habit of seeking certainty is deeply ingrained. But each time you notice the urge to grasp for guarantees and choose to rest in awareness instead, the grip loosens. The nervous system learns that it can survive without constant reassurance. Uncertainty is not a flaw in life. It is life's openness. It allows growth, discovery, and change. When you stop treating uncertainty as an enemy, it becomes a space of possibility rather than threat. In that space, a different kind of confidence emerges. Not the confidence of knowing, but the confidence of being present. This confidence does not depend on predictions. It rests on the simple, profound fact that whatever arises, awareness is here to meet it. The present moment is often spoken of as if it were a destination, a peaceful place you arrive at and then remain within. Buddhist teachings reveal something quieter and more honest. The present moment is not something you reach once and keep forever. It is something you return to, again and again, sometimes hundreds of times a day. This returning is not failure. It is the practice itself. The mind naturally wanders. It revisits old conversations, replays mistakes, imagines futures that have not arrived. This wandering is not a personal flaw. It is a conditioned habit. Buddhism for beginners often feels discouraged by this movement, believing that calm means stopping it entirely. Buddhist wisdom offers a different perspective. Peace is not the absence of wandering. Peace is the willingness to return without judgment. Each time attention leaves the present, suffering quietly enters. Not because the past or future are bad, but because the mind mistakes them for what is happening now. Anxiety forms when imagined futures are treated as immediate threats. Regret deepens when the past is treated as something still unfolding. The present moment becomes obscured by mental time. Buddhist lessons for anxiety repeatedly guide attention back to what is here. Breath moving in and out. The weight of the body. The simple fact of being alive in this moment. These are not distractions from reality. They are reality, before the mind adds layers of interpretation. Returning to the present moment is an act of protecting your energy. Energy drains when the mind fights time, wishing the past were different or the future more certain. When attention rests in the present, energy stabilizes. You are no longer pushing against what cannot be changed or pulling toward what cannot be controlled. Living without fear becomes more accessible in this simplicity. Fear thrives in imagined scenarios. The present moment, when observed closely, is often manageable. Even pain, when met directly, is less overwhelming than the stories built around it. Awareness discovers that many fears dissolve when faced without delay. Finding peace in chaos does not require chaos to end. It requires anchoring attention where chaos cannot dominate. Sounds may be loud. Situations may be complex. Yet the present moment remains intact beneath it all. Awareness touches this layer and discovers steadiness. The act of returning is gentle. There is no force involved. When you notice the mind has wandered, you simply come back. No criticism. No frustration. Each return strengthens familiarity with presence. Over time, returning becomes easier. The mind wanders less aggressively. Recovery becomes faster. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often begin here. Before seeking answers, return. Before analyzing your life, return. Before judging yourself, return. The present moment does not require improvement. It requires attention. In that attention, clarity begins to form naturally. This practice transforms your mind gradually. You stop expecting constant calm. You stop measuring progress by how long you can stay present. Instead, you notice how quickly you return. Speed of return replaces duration of focus. Compassion replaces discipline. In everyday life, returning looks ordinary. You pause during a conversation and notice your breath. You feel tension in the body and allow it to soften. You catch yourself worrying and gently come back to what is in front of you. These moments do not stand out, yet they reshape the inner landscape. Ancient Buddhist practitioners understood that awakening was not separate from daily activity. Walking, eating, working, and resting were all opportunities to return. The present moment was not reserved for meditation halls. It was woven into life itself. When you stop demanding that the present moment be pleasant, it becomes more welcoming. Even discomfort is allowed. Even confusion has space. Awareness does not exclude. It holds everything without preference. This inclusive quality is what allows transformation without force. The mind learns that it does not need to escape the present to survive. Safety is discovered here, not later. Peace is found here, not after conditions improve. If this practice of returning feels meaningful to you, consider supporting Daily Dharma Listening by subscribing, liking, and sharing this series. These small gestures allow ancient Buddhist teachings and reflections to continue reaching those searching for steadiness in uncertain times. The present moment will be lost again. That is certain. But it will also be found again. Each return is a reminder that nothing essential has been lost. Awareness is always waiting, patient and unchanged, ready to receive you once more. Thoughts move through the mind the way weather moves through the sky. Some arrive softly and pass unnoticed. Others gather force, darken perception, and seem to cover everything. Buddhist teachings invite a simple yet radical shift in how thoughts are understood. Thoughts are events, not facts. They happen, but they do not define reality. For most people, thoughts feel intimate and authoritative. A thought appears and is immediately believed. I am failing. This will never work. Something bad is coming. The body reacts as if these statements were proven truths. Anxiety tightens the chest. Fear accelerates the breath. Buddhist wisdom asks for careful observation. Where did the thought come from? Where does it go when not followed? When you begin to watch thoughts instead of obeying them, something changes. You notice gaps. A thought arises, lingers, then dissolves. Another replaces it. This movement reveals an important insight. If thoughts were solid truths, they would not vanish so easily. Their impermanence exposes their nature. Buddhism for beginners often expects the practice to stop thinking. Buddhist teachings do not aim for this. They aim for relationship. a relationship in which thoughts are recognized without being granted absolute authority. When this relationship shifts, mental suffering decreases significantly. Buddhist lessons for anxiety often focus here because anxiety is sustained by repetitive thinking. The same scenarios are imagined again and again, strengthening fear pathways. When thoughts are seen as mental weather, repetition loses its power. A storm may pass through, but it does not become the sky. To protect your energy, it becomes essential to notice which thoughts drain vitality. Not all thoughts deserve attention. Some are habitual echoes of past experiences. Others are protective mechanisms that no longer serve their original purpose. Awareness allows you to let these thoughts pass without engagement. Living without fear does not require eliminating fearful thoughts. Fearful thoughts may continue to arise. The difference lies in whether they are believed. When fear is recognized as a passing mental state rather than a command, it no longer dictates behavior. Finding peace in chaos becomes possible when you stop mistaking inner noise for external reality. Chaos often feels overwhelming because thoughts amplify it. When thoughts settle, chaos is revealed as manageable, dynamic, and less personal. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often involve this recognition. You are not lost because a thought says so. You feel lost because a thought has been believed without question. When that belief loosens, orientation returns. In daily life, this practice unfolds quietly. A critical thought appears and is noticed rather than followed. A worrying scenario arises and is allowed to pass. Over time, the mind learns that not every thought requires response. Silence grows between thoughts, not as emptiness, but as space. Transforming your mind through this understanding is gradual. Thoughts do not disappear overnight, but their grip weakens. You recover faster. You identify less. You rest more often in awareness rather than narration. Ancient Buddhist teachings compare the untrained mind to a house with open windows during a storm. Everything is blown inside. With awareness, the windows remain open, but nothing is taken personally. The storm passes. The house remains intact. When thoughts are no longer treated as truth, curiosity replaces fear. You become interested in the patterns of the mind rather than trapped by them. This curiosity is gentle. It does not analyze aggressively. It observes patiently. The sky does not panic when clouds appear. It allows them. In the same way, awareness does not panic when thoughts arise. It recognizes their temporary nature. In that recognition, freedom quietly unfolds. Thoughts will continue to come. Some will be pleasant. Others will be uncomfortable. None of them need to define you. When this is deeply seen, the mind becomes lighter. The inner world opens. And clarity returns without effort. Compassion is often misunderstood as endless giving, constant understanding, or the quiet erasure of one's own needs. Buddhist teachings approach compassion from a deeper and more stable ground. True compassion does not require self-abandonment. It arises from clarity, not sacrifice. When compassion is rooted in awareness, it becomes sustainable rather than draining. Many people associate kindness with exhaustion. They listen beyond capacity, give beyond balance, tolerate beyond health. Over time, resentment grows quietly beneath the surface. Buddhist wisdom recognizes this pattern and gently corrects it. Compassion without wisdom becomes attachment. Wisdom without compassion becomes coldness. The path moves between these extremes. To understand compassion clearly, it helps to see how suffering operates. Suffering contracts the mind. It narrows perspective and demands relief. When you encounter another's suffering, the instinct may be to fix it, absorb it, or carry it for them. Buddhist teachings invite a different response. Be present without merging. Care without collapsing. This balance protects your energy while allowing genuine connection. When you recognize that each being has their own path, their own karma, their own learning, you stop trying to control outcomes. Compassion becomes an offering, not an obligation. You give what is appropriate, not what depletes you. Buddhism for beginners often equates compassion with emotional intensity. Yet Buddhist wisdom emphasizes steadiness. A calm presence can be more compassionate than urgent intervention. When you are steady, others feel safe. When you are overwhelmed, suffering multiplies. Buddhist lessons for anxiety often highlight how over-identification with others' emotions fuels distress. You feel responsible for fixing what is beyond your control. Anxiety grows when boundaries blur. Awareness restores those boundaries naturally, without hardening the heart. Living without fear includes the courage to say no when no is needed. This is not rejection. It is honesty. Compassion that ignores truth eventually becomes harmful. When you honor your limits, you model self-respect. This, too, is a form of kindness. Finding peace in chaos requires recognizing where responsibility ends. You can care deeply without carrying everything. You can listen without absorbing. You can support without rescuing. Buddhist teachings remind you that each person must walk their own steps. Compassion walks beside, not ahead. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often return to self-compassion first. Harshness toward yourself creates confusion. Gentleness restores orientation. When you treat your own experience with patience, you naturally extend that patience to others. In daily life, cultivating balanced compassion shows up quietly. You listen without interrupting. You speak honestly without cruelty. You rest when needed without guilt. These actions do not draw attention, but they change the quality of relationships. Transforming your mind through compassion is not about becoming endlessly soft. It is about becoming deeply real. Real enough to acknowledge pain. Real enough to recognize limits. Real enough to stay present without being consumed. Ancient Buddhist teachings emphasize that compassion begins with understanding. Understanding impermanence. Understanding conditioning. Understanding that suffering does not make someone bad, and it does not make you responsible for saving them. This understanding creates space where compassion can breathe. When compassion is guided by awareness, it does not exhaust you. It nourishes you. It feels quiet and grounded rather than urgent and heavy. You give because it is natural, not because you are afraid of withholding. As this quality deepens, relationships soften. Expectations relax. You stop measuring yourself by how much you give. You measure yourself by how honestly and clearly you meet each moment. Compassion, in this sense, is not something you force. It is something that emerges when the mind is no longer defending itself. When fear loosens, care flows naturally. When attachment softens, kindness stabilizes. In that stability, compassion becomes what it was always meant to be. A steady presence that allows both you and others to breathe. There is a word in Buddhist teachings that often creates confusion and quiet resistance. Emptiness. To the untrained ear, it sounds like absence, loss, or nothingness. The mind imagines a void where meaning dissolves and life becomes hollow. Yet Buddhist wisdom points to something entirely different. Emptiness is not a lack. It is openness. It is the absence of fixedness that allows everything to appear. When the Buddha spoke of emptiness, he was not describing a bleak philosophy. He was describing freedom. Freedom from rigid identities. Freedom from permanent labels. Freedom from the belief that anything exists independently, sealed off from change. Emptiness reveals that life is dynamic, relational, and alive with possibility. Much suffering arises from the belief that things are solid. The idea that you are a certain way and cannot change. The belief that a situation is permanently broken. The assumption that emotions define reality. Buddhist teachings gently dissolve these assumptions. They do not replace them with new beliefs. They invite direct seeing. Buddhism for beginners often approaches emptiness cautiously, fearing it may erase meaning. In lived experience, the opposite happens. When fixed meanings loosen, life becomes more vivid. Without rigid expectations, moments are met freshly. Without fixed roles, relationships breathe. Consider how often pain intensifies when you tell yourself this should not be happening or this means something terrible about me. These conclusions rely on solidity. Emptiness reveals that experiences do not carry inherent meaning. Meaning is added by the mind. When this is seen, suffering softens. Buddhist lessons for anxiety often intersect here. Anxiety clings to imagined certainties about danger, failure, or loss. Emptiness shows that these certainties are constructions. Thoughts feel convincing because they are believed, not because they are true. When beliefs loosen, anxiety loses its foundation. To protect your energy, emptiness becomes a quiet ally. When you stop assuming that every thought, feeling, or situation is solid and final, you stop exhausting yourself trying to defend against them. Energy returns when resistance fades. Living without fear becomes possible when fear is seen as empty of permanence. Fear arises, moves, and passes. It does not define you. It does not predict the future. It is an experience within awareness, not a verdict. Finding peace in chaos becomes possible when chaos is no longer interpreted as a threat to a fixed self. If the self is fluid, responsive, and open, chaos becomes movement rather than danger. You adapt rather than collapse. Buddhist reminders when you feel lost often point toward emptiness gently. Feeling lost does not mean you have no direction. It means old reference points have dissolved. This dissolution creates space. In that space, new understanding can arise. Emptiness is what allows transformation. If things were fixed, change would be impossible. Because everything is empty of permanence, growth occurs. Healing unfolds. Insight deepens. This is not abstract philosophy. It is observable in daily life. In moments of self-judgment, emptiness loosens harsh conclusions. You are not a single moment. You are not one mistake. You are not defined by one emotion. Each of these arises and passes. Awareness remains. In relationships, emptiness creates compassion. When you see that others are shaped by countless conditions, blame softens. Understanding grows. You respond with curiosity instead of rigidity. Transforming your mind through emptiness does not require effort. It requires seeing. Seeing that what you fear losing was never fixed. Seeing that what you cling to was never owned. Seeing that life is not a structure to defend, but a flow to participate in. Ancient Buddhist wisdom did not treat emptiness as an intellectual concept. It was lived through observation, watching sensations change, watching thoughts dissolve, watching identities shift. Each observation reinforced the same truth. Nothing stands alone. Nothing stays the same. When emptiness is misunderstood, it feels threatening. When it is understood directly, it feels liberating. You stop carrying the weight of certainty. You stop demanding guarantees. You meet life with flexibility. In that flexibility, creativity emerges. Compassion deepens. Fear loosens. Life feels less like a problem to solve and more like a process to engage. Emptiness does not remove meaning. It removes rigidity. And in that removal, meaning becomes something alive, something discovered moment by moment, rather than imposed in advance. What remains is not nothing. What remains is openness. And in that openness, everything is possible. There is a quiet misunderstanding that follows many people on a spiritual path. The belief that there will be a final arrival point, a moment when everything settles, when confusion disappears, when the work is complete. Buddhist teachings gently undo this expectation. The path is not a straight line with a finish. It is a way of walking, moment by moment, without demanding that life resolve into certainty. When the mind imagines an end point, impatience grows. You wonder why peace has not arrived yet. You measure yourself against an imagined ideal. You turn practice into another task to complete. Buddhist wisdom invites a softer orientation. The path is not about becoming someone else. It is about meeting who you already are, more honestly, more gently, in each unfolding moment. Much suffering arises from the belief that you are not there yet. Yet the present moment is the only place the path has ever existed. Each breath, each sensation, each thought noticed without clinging is the path expressing itself. There is nothing missing. There is only the habit of overlooking what is already here. Buddhism for beginners often seeks reassurance. Am I doing this right? Am I progressing? Buddhist teachings do not answer these questions directly. They redirect attention. Are you aware? Are you present? Are you kind in this moment? These questions do not point toward the future. They point toward now. Walking the path without an end in sight requires trust. Trust not in a promised outcome, but in awareness itself. Awareness has carried you through joy and pain, certainty and doubt, clarity and confusion. It has never left. Even when forgotten, it remained. This trust grows slowly, not through belief, but through lived experience. Buddhist lessons for anxiety often soften when this trust develops. Anxiety feeds on the fear of not knowing where things are going. When you stop demanding a map for the entire journey, anxiety loosens. You focus on the step you are taking rather than the destination you cannot see. To protect your energy on this path, it becomes important to release comparison. There is no standard pace. No universal timeline. Each life unfolds according to countless conditions. When you stop comparing your inner process to someone else's outer expression, energy returns. Attention becomes available for what actually needs care. Living without fear does not mean walking without uncertainty. It means walking without insisting that uncertainty be eliminated first. The Buddha did not wait for life to become predictable before practicing. He practiced within impermanence, within not knowing, within change. This is why the teachings remain alive. They do not depend on ideal conditions. Finding peace in chaos becomes a lived reality when you stop postponing peace until chaos ends. Chaos may remain. Noise may continue. Challenges may arise. Yet the relationship to them changes. You no longer treat them as obstacles to the path. They become part of it. Buddhist reminders: when you feel lost, take on a new tone here. Feeling lost does not mean you have stepped off the path. It means you are walking without false certainty. This can feel disorienting at first. Over time, it becomes liberating. You are no longer confined by expectations of how things should unfold. Transforming your mind on this path is subtle. There may be no dramatic milestones. Instead, you notice small shifts. A quicker return to presence. A softer response to difficulty. A deeper patience with yourself and others. These changes do not announce themselves, yet they reshape your life. Ancient Buddhist practitioners understood that the path was not something to possess. It was something to live. Each day offered the same invitation. To see clearly. To let go when holding caused suffering. To act with care when care was needed. To rest when rest was possible. As you continue walking, doubts may arise. Fatigue may appear. Inspiration may fade in return. None of this means the path is lost. It means you are human. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to transcend humanity. It asks you to understand it deeply. There is no final chapter where everything becomes simple. Life remains complex, textured, and unpredictable. What changes is not life itself, but the way it is met. The mind becomes less rigid. The heart becomes more spacious. Awareness becomes a steady companion. Walking the path without an end in sight is not a burden. It is a release. A release from the pressure to arrive. A release from the need to be finished. In this release, each moment becomes sufficient. The path continues not because something is missing, but because life continues. And with each step, awareness walks with you, unchanged, patient, and quietly complete.